Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Dougy's Dungeon podcast. Today we have Thistle Sifter again, so why don't you go ahead and shout yourself out?
As you said, I'm Thistle Sifter. Mainly all of my stuff is on TikTok. I'm starting to get on Instagram. It's Thistle_Sifter on Instagram.
And I'll definitely leave links in like the YouTube bio and the description for the podcast. So today's episode is going to be called a new DM's guide to problem players, and we're going to be talking about kind of different categories of problem players that, as a dungeon master, you might run into. So we're going to have power gamers, meta gamers, rules lawyers, no sellers, and griefers. They're all different types of players, and we'll kind of describe the kind of players we're talking about in each different category. So the first one is going to be power gamers. So you want to kick it off? Like, you want to describe what to you is a power gamer?
Absolutely. To me, a power gamer is someone who cares very little for role play. Role play, if it's cared about at all, is a backseat. They're more focused on numbers and getting the biggest numbers they can possibly get. Multi-classing for no reason and things such in that line.
Yeah, and I'd go far as to say that like power gamers specifically are probably the least, like if we're going in order of least heinous to most heinous kind of behavior as a player, I would say that power gamers are definitely on the bottom of that scale. These are people, in my opinion, that just like to get the absolute most out of the numerical aspects of their character. Like they want the most damage dice. They want the most skill numbers on their skill rolls. Like these are people that just
The highest AC. Yeah.
yeah, like they like seeing those numbers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, even myself as a player, I
Yeah.
think everyone kind of has a little power gamer in them. You know, they want to be
Yeah.
they want their character to be good at what their character is trying to do. So you know, to a certain extent, it is understandable. But for a problem player, we're talking about the other end of that spectrum, like when it starts to actually be a problem. So we're talking
Yeah.
players that ignore uh, role play to a larger extent. They are multi-classing specifically to edge out um, like better numbers to surpass everything. You know, these are the kind of
They're
players.
trying to win.
Yeah, they're trying to win at Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah.
and there really is no way to do it. So, how would you like as a dungeon master? What is advice that you would give to any new dungeon master to kind of help and handle these types of players?
Yeah. Well, one thing to go ahead and get out of the way, and this applies to all of our the problem players. The first step is talking to them, trying to get some common ground and some understanding between the two. With power gamers, it depends on calling them out as chat says, but trying to get understand why they're doing it. Like, is it specifically they just don't want to kind of fall behind the rest of the party? They're trying to get the are they just focused on combat, or do they just need to get it out of their system, or is it something maybe a little bit deeper?
Yeah, I think definitely for all of these, except maybe the last one, the last category,
Yeah.
grievers. I think every category, the best and first course of action should just be communication. Open that line of communication with your player, like open that dialogue and
Yeah.
voice your concerns, ask their side of the story. Because you may be as a dungeon master, you may see these things as a problem that are a problem, but they may not actually be a problem. Like you may be a little oversensitive to the type of player. You can be preconditioned to think that certain behaviors are bad when
Yeah.
they're not necessarily bad. Like power gaming isn't necessarily bad, but it can become a problem at the table. So
Absolutely.
opening up that dialogue, getting your player's side of the story, kind of hashing out those details is definitely a good course of action. One thing that I would do for these types of players is if they're really focused on combat. Just me thinking they like combat. So what I would do is I would throw them a bone every once in a while. If you're playing an RPG game, you have a power gamer that wants to focus on the combat aspect of things. Throw them a bone. Throw them an interesting combat every once in a while. Satiate that power gamer itch for them, and you might see that some of these aspects of them trying to power game can will lessen some. Obviously, this is not always the case, but then again, like communicate with them. Yeah,
Yeah, and once again, in talking to the power gamer, another thing that can help is it's a kind of a it can wind up being an arms race. Whatever, however strong, however big their numbers can get, the DM that controls the world can make bigger numbers, can pull something else that is stronger.
yeah, it's a never-ending arms race against the dungeon master. And so talk with your dungeon master. One thing that you could, as a dungeon master, do for this player as well is instead of creating combats that creep up with the power of the power gamer, you were talking about this earlier. You kind of put a title to the practice, but basically create glory seekers. So that way you don't have to challenge the entire party. You create a powerful NPC that just wants to target that power gamer. They are glory seekers. They know that that specific character is really good at a specific form of combat, and they want to challenge themselves. If it's a mage, it could be like a wizard's duel with that specific character. It doesn't have to involve the entire party if the entire party isn't necessarily keen on doing combats all the time. They might want a more RP focused game, but if you have a power gamer that likes combat, likes those numbers, give them a glory seeker. And I guarantee, in some extent, you'll see some change in their behavior. They'll probably love it.
Yeah, that it'll probably help them scratch that itch that they're wanting. That intense combat. That's like you said. It allows them. It allows that power gamer to have that big fight where they need those big numbers without endangering or wiping out the rest of the party.
Yeah. So, what about metagamers? I think these kind of overlap a little bit. There's a lot of
They
overlap with a
can.
lot of these types of players. Usually, if you have one behavior, you might have more than one. So, metagamers. How would you classify metagamers?
Metagamers to me is anyone who has kind of uses knowledge or things outside of the world, outside of the D&D campaign, in order to get a desired effect in the game. Whether that be fudging dice rolls or using knowledge, reading through if their DM's using a module or something, the people who read through the module ahead of time, things like that.
The cheaters.
Yes, the cheaters.
Yeah, I mean, there's no real way to like beat around this bush. Like they are essentially cheating. Like the closest thing that cheating could be in this hobby, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
Definitely like fudging dice rolls. Those players that will like roll a dice before it's asked, and then like pick the dice up immediately and be like, "Oh yeah, I rolled an 18." Like, are
Yeah.
you sure? Like, can you roll that again? Like those types of players, or like using metagame knowledge, like monster knowledge. Like if they had never come up across this monster, but you say troll, they automatically pull out fire
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Um,
Especially more uncommon things. Like if they are going up against demons and they know how to defeat a demon and they're, first level adventurers, something's off.
I mean, if it makes sense for the backstory, it could be stretched a little bit. That's
Right.
why I like to play wizards. They got the all the
Yeah.
knowledge skills, and they can kind of flavor
They
it a
have a
little
good
bit.
chance.
Yeah, a good chance
Good
of
chance
like,
of knowing it.
yeah, I read that in one of the books I was studying at college, you
Yeah,
know. But we're talking mainly like the player character isn't a demon hunter, but they have extensive and vast knowledge on how to deal with all the lesser and higher demons.
yeah.
Uh,
They've read the stat block.
yeah. So how would you, as a like again, we're gonna kind of go through this same process. How would you, as a
Yeah.
dungeon master, give advice to new dungeon masters on this issue?
So with new dungeon masters that are coming against players that are using knowledge that they shouldn't have, especially with monsters, change the stat block. If they have immunities or if they have vulnerabilities, change what their damage type of vulnerability is, or change their. You can mess with their AC. You can mess with their abilities, what perceptions they have. That way, regardless if they read the monster manual or not, you're able to. It doesn't help them because you have changed that monster.
Yeah, and one thing that I would do that really goes a long way to prevent this kind of behavior is don't outwardly say the names of the
Yeah,
monsters that you're throwing in front of them. If you're going to throw a troll in front of them, maybe describe them more vague, like a giant. And so they confuse this with a giant unless they actually take an action to stop and roll a knowledge check to like research that I've done on this, the way that this is behaving, the ecosystem that we're in right now. This isn't
yeah,
actually a giant. This is I don't know, a troll instead, or something like that. A storm giant as opposed to a hill giant, because they may look similar. They're both they're both giant,
yeah. Yeah, they're
but
both very big, but yeah, like as kind of piggybacking off what you said, don't say the name, but describe them. What do they see? What do they smell? What are some things the players might have noticed on the way to this creature's lair?
yeah, definitely.
Give them information without telling them exactly what it is.
Yeah, and then you can have the player's imagination kind of run uh, away with it, and then actually, kind of a little tangent. I've had instances where I go into a situation wanting to throw a particular monster in front of the players, and then I kind of foreshadow and allude and stuff like that, describing monsters in different ways, and then the players will end up thinking it's a different, cooler monster, and then that's your opportunity to be like, you know what? Yeah, that's the monster I want to use. That's cooler than what I
Yeah,
had in mind. Then you can go that way. But that's a little side tangent.
yeah,
Another way to deal with cheaters, specifically like the people who like roll dice and pick them up,
yeah,
we kind of talked about it. Having like a communal dice tray. Like no,
yeah,
none of the rolls matter. I mean, this is kind of hard to do in person nowadays. It's
yeah,
everyone might be doing everything online, but have a communal dice tray, or if you're rolling online, I mean, there's already
yeah.
usually
There's
yeah,
already a readout.
yeah. So that may be a less of an issue now, but in-person games using a dice tray and not having those rolls count for anything unless
Yeah,
you've asked for the roll first and then it's been rolled into the dice tray. And then that kind of prevents people from rolling and swiping it back up, or rolling randomly and then they'll get a good roll and be like, "Oh, that was my stealth roll."
yeah.
That happens quite often. So,
Well, and a step down from, or a step back, I guess, from the dice tray is just having set up rules. Like what happens if your players roll and it rolls off the table? Like if it's a bad roll, they'll usually, oh no, that one doesn't count. It was off the table. But if it's a 20, oh look, it's a 20 now.
yeah,
Like have standardized rules for it.
what I do is if the dice rolls off the table, no matter what it's rolled for, I actually will then roll the result. So if it rolls off the table, like if you were just chucking your dice everywhere and it falls off the table, well then now I, as a dungeon master, roll that skill for you or that attack for you or whatever. It's just a way to keep things on the table.
Yeah.
And I've actually had players sometimes know that I have better dice than them, just chuck their dice off the table, be like, "Can you roll it for me?"
Oh no.
Yeah, I got a pair of lucky dice, so
Yeah. Every DM needs a set of lucky dice. It helps.
yeah, it's the when you bring it out whenever the players are getting a little too big for their bridges, you know.
Yeah.
So how would
Yeah.
you talk to the player about this kind of behavior, the metagamer?
The
Like, how would you
metagamer.
address the metagamer specifically? Because we want people to, if you have a
Yeah.
problem player in your party, you can show this to them. You can skip
Yeah.
to whatever part you want to talk about, and then you can show this to them, and they can be addressed.
Well, speaking to the metagamers, one, make sure they understand that it cheapens the experience of the game. If you're, especially for things like the people who are fudging dice or maybe messing with their dice somehow, that's it. It just cheapens the game if there's no chance for that failure, if there's no chance for something to go wrong. When it does go right, it it just doesn't have that same feeling. You're you're cheapening it for not only the DM but the other players too.
Yeah, like you got to remember that there's other people at this table, and if they're planning out all their consequences and you aren't, like you're the only person not playing out their consequences as they come up with dice rolls, it's going to make their characters feel like them feel worse about their characters because nothing bad ever happens to them. Or
Yeah.
sorry, everything bad happens to their characters, but nothing bad happens to yours. So, like, if you are reducing risk for only yourself and cheating, let's call what it is, you
Yeah.
are cheating in this game, the closest form of cheating that this game has. Um, you are cheapening the experience for everyone at the table, including the dungeon master. Um, I kind of wanted to go more into like maybe the headspace of these type of people. Like if you are cheating because you want your character to survive a certain situation or you just don't like the risk to your character, I can kind of get that. Like on some level, like you like your characters, you don't want them to die. You feel like death is cheap and that's just not what you want to experience at the table.
They may have put a lot of effort into that character and into the backstory and don't want to lose that character.
Yeah,
And I
and
can get that.
I can get that, but I would bring those concerns to your dungeon master. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that cheating is okay. Like don't cheat.
No.
But I can understand where those feelings come from, but bring those concerns to your dungeon master. You can really work out a lot of these issues if you just talk to them and then maybe yes, your character dies, but especially in Dungeons and Dragons, you have spells that you can um, resurrect characters. They could be banished instead. The combat that your character died in doesn't have to be to the death. They could just be captured and moved to a different location. Like there's so many different ways narratively that you can deal with keeping your character alive and minimizing those consequences, but still playing and role playing into the failures of a character. So just work with your dungeon master if you're having these issues. If these are
Yeah,
your
every
feelings.
every every good story has that low point before, the big climax. Like you need those failures to make all the more epic things feel that much more epic.
Yeah. So now we're on to
Yes.
rules lawyers. But first, I want to kind of distinguish between rules lawyers and what I consider rules traditionalists. To me, a rules lawyer is what a lawyer is. A lawyer is not arguing the rules for the rules' sake. They're arguing the rules to win the case. So, a rules lawyer compared to a rules traditionalist, a rules lawyer will never argue against their own favor. A rules traditionalist will. A rules traditionalist just wants to stick to the rules, even if it is to their own detriment. So I feel like that is a completely different category. That is just someone who likes the rules for the rules' sake, doesn't want to change it up, just wants to play pure Dungeons and Dragons read as written. That's not necessarily the type of player we're talking to, but some of the issues that we talk about have kind of overlap. I don't view rules traditionalists necessarily as problem players overall. I am specifically talking about the players that are arguing only to win, and that's the distinction.
Yeah. When I think with a little bit, especially with your the traditionalist, with the traditionalist, they can they can take a little bit of that load off of the DM. The DM is running characters and NPCs and trying to set up what's next, and they may forget a rule here or there, and that's okay for one of the players to say, "Hey, this is actually what how that character actually has advantage on me to hit me," or that's okay. It's when it becomes when the DM has said, "Okay, well, I understand that's how it's written, but we're doing it this way," or "This is why I don't think that applies here," and they're like, "Yeah, but this is what the book says." That's when it starts becoming that problem player.
Yeah. So basically, like, where the problem actually stems from is, I guess, players' oversight or overreaching uh,
Yes.
when it comes to the rules. Because like a lot of rules traditionalists, because we're kind of still talking about them, like Chad is saying, read as written or bust. So many common house rules can make games worse, and that's true. Like you can have players that just want to stick to read as written because they feel like that's a structure to the game that shouldn't be messed with. And it's true, a lot of house rules can have a tendency to mess with the framework of the game and lessen the experience. But that's on a individual scale, and my counter to that would be, well, if you're a rules traditionalist, then find a group that's not homebrewing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Find a
League
group.
of
There's plenty of them out there. Find a group that is read as written, like rules as written, and you won't
yeah,
have that
find a
issue.
adventurers league or something.
I would honestly advise against that. I've run plenty of
I've not
adventurers
played.
games. Yeah, I've run plenty of public games. Anyone who enjoys roleplay, do not
Mm,
play Adventurers League or Pathfinder
okay.
Society or the equivalent. Public games, in my personal experience, I will put that disclaimer out there. In my personal experience, are not the place to be a rules traditionalist either, because you'll get a lot of rules lawyers instead because they're trying to win.
Yeah.
Um,
Speaking of rules lawyers, so something to keep in mind with a rule lawyer, they tend to have, like as you were saying, have that argument only when it benefits them. If it's not benefiting them, it's different. That doesn't count. They don't want to talk about it then. And those are the ones that can really, I feel like the rules lawyer, similar to real life lawyers, have that tendency to keep arguing. They don't accept that when the DM has said no, this is how we're ruling it. Yeah, but I mean, like if you think about it, no. And I think that's one of the best ways to handle it is to no, this is how we're running this. This is my decision, and right now is not the time to talk about.
Yeah, if you're a new dungeon master, find your voice as a dungeon master. If you don't like a particular rule of the game, the rules are guidelines. They are there to be molded by you. Whether that's good, like whether it ends up being better or worse, that is on an individual table basis. But as a dungeon master, you are the one creating the framework of your game. And so, find your voice as a dungeon master. Say no to rulings that you don't like. If you don't like the way armor class is handled in your game, ask Thistle Sifter. I'm going to be running a new game.
Yeah,
I've completely changed the way that armor class works in my game
yeah,
compared to, base games. Is it going to turn out better? I don't know. We'll find out. But, you know, it's the game is there to be molded to whatever you want, and that's what makes Dungeons and Dragons so interesting. So say no, and don't be afraid to put your foot down. Say no. Like, there's this tendency, especially nowadays, and it's
Yeah.
fine, but there's a tendency nowadays to yes, and you got to agree with your players. It's their story too, and to a certain extent that is true. But there's lines that you have to draw. There are limits and borders to the rules that any game has to have if it's going to be cohesive. So put your foot down, find your voice.
Yeah, another thing, instead of yes and, no, but. No, you cannot do this, but this is kind of the compromise I'm willing to go with.
Perfect example. Yeah, that great example. No but. No
I
comma
try.
but. Another thing you could do is get a consensus from the other players. If you don't know how a ruling should go, feel it out at the table. Don't be afraid to, slow the game down and be like, hey, how does everyone else feel about this ruling? I'm thinking about doing it this way. What are you guys' thoughts? That's a perfect way to do that. I do that approach all the time, and a lot of times you'll get the player. It's like becomes a collaborative effort to kind of create the structure of your game
Yeah.
world, and I feel like that in and of itself is a great way to approach these situations. Is if you have
Well,
questions about the rules, especially if you have some more experienced dungeon masters in your group, ask them about their thoughts on a particular ruling. They might be like, "Oh yeah, that sounds like an amazing idea. I love that homebrew idea. Let's do it. Let's try it." And other times they might, give you advice and be like, I don't know. It might turn out this way, and I don't think that's what you're kind of looking for." But then again, if you still want to do it, put your foot down. You're the dungeon master. It's your game.
and especially talking about getting a consensus from the party, especially if it's not a convention or a one shot, but if you this is your party that you will be playing once a month or once a week with, as if everyone feels that this thing doesn't make sense, then there is no reason to keep it in the game. Or if they feel the opposite, that this thing should be in the game and isn't, then I've had something similar happen with a I made a video on TikTok about it. It was an opportunity attack that happened out of combat. Someone, one of the NPCs, kind of lied to the party and made them drop their guard, and they were relaxed. And then they cast, like, as they left, they cast a spell real quick, and they were like, "Oh, well, now I've decided to attack you." No one was paying attention to you, and in the middle of the session, I was like, "Well, this is what we're going to do. Since it was on you, you get your attack. Everyone else was not paying attention; they were off investigating other things. So this is the ruling right now." And then after the session and the next couple of days, we all discussed it. I talked to all of my players and got feedback from them about how they think it should happen. And essentially, we came down to, instead of everyone kind of talking about what they are doing, like going to player to player, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And this is what happens now. Instead of kind of catching them uh, catching them in the act of thinking about what they were doing, have them committed to something.
And yeah, you kind of touched on a great topic. Don't be afraid to reapproach the situation
Yeah.
afterward. So in the moment, you can just say, "No, this is how we're gonna roll with it. This is how we're gonna do it." Because what you want to prevent is bogging down the game. You don't want to bog down the game. You don't want to slow role play down. You don't want to like basically put hard stop breaks on everything. So what I would recommend is make a ruling in the moment during the game, during the session, and then if it didn't sit well with you, if it didn't sit well with the other players, reapproach the situation and then handle it from there on. Uh, yeah, handle it
Yeah.
that way from
Moving
there on
forward.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is like really where communication with your players is really key. Just talk to your players. That is the best And the first thing you should always be doing if you're having problem players or having issues at your table, just talk to people. I mean, for the most part, these are going to be your friends or at least people you consider to be pretty good acquaintances if you're going to be running games for them on average. I mean, every person's situation is different, but they're going to be willing more often than not to talk it out with you, especially if you, as a dungeon master, are approaching them.
Right. Even if you're not friends, you can still be friendly. You can
Yeah,
still have that common respect, and for the most part, everyone there is going to be adults, and everyone there will have their own opinion regardless. And I would even say, even outside of there being a problem that doesn't sit well, talk to your players just throughout the campaign and check with them every now and again to see how they feel, what they think of either specific sessions or campaigns and things, and keep communication open. It'll make it easier when there is a problem for them to come to you and say, hey, this isn't working for me. I see this as a problem. If they
absolutely.
know that communication is there.
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, they'd be more willing to come to you with issues. So, how would you address a rules lawyer or a rules traditionalist in this regard? I think we should kind of address
Yeah.
one or the other. So, which one would
Yeah.
you like to take a stab at? Like addressing the
Um,
player.
I think with a rules traditionalist, uh, one thing that you can say, one similar to what you did with the campaign you're about to start. If you do have homebrew rules, set them up. Let the players know before the campaign starts that hey, these are things that I rule different,
How would you
and
address
get
the
that out
how would you address the player? Like
there.
tell the player to I'm saying like you're speaking to the player like how would you tell them to like handle the DM essentially? Like
Speaking specifically to a rule traditionalist, that okay, I as the DM am trying to keep the game flowing. So when I make a ruling, something comes up, we're going to go with that ruling. Once after the session, we can talk about it, but in the middle of the session is not the time to try and discuss what is or is not rules as written or rules as intended. Let's move on. Let's accept this ruling and we'll move on from it later. I
and
mean, a similar thing with a rules lawyer too, but I feel you may have to be uh, a bit more firm, a bit more front and center with a rules lawyer.
yeah, I the thing I would say to a rules lawyer specifically um, is stop trying to win. This is not a game that is to be won. The rules are there for you to have fun and to collaborate with your fellow party members, with the dungeon masters. You are coming together to create a cohesive story. And so stop trying to win. At the end of Lord of the Rings, no one really wins. You know, Sam loses his best friend because he moves away. Frodo is forever tortured. You know, these stories that you're telling, they're not meant to be won. There's not meant to be a
Yeah,
winner. You're not winning against your fellow friendly adventuring party. Like they're there to support you and you're there to support them. And so when you approach this game as something to be won, as you know, rules are meant to be argued in your favor and you want things to always be in your favor, I feel like you're not getting the game. And that's okay. You know, you could want to be good at things, and that's fine. That's something you can strive for, but I think you're taking the wrong approach, and I think you should reassess the way that you approach this game because I think
yeah,
if you approach it in the regard that it is just a hobby to be enjoyed and relax and escape this world from, you'll kind of settle down a little bit and be less antsy to prevent anything bad from happening to your character. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And once again, if you are a newer DM that has a rules lawyer or a traditionalist in your party, refer them to Rule Zero. The DM is right. The DM has the final say on any ruling. That is their role as the DM.
That doesn't mean you can't voice your concerns. You can always voice your concerns, and you should. But in the game, in the moment, Rule Zero stands.
Yes.
Now we're on to no sellers.
We're getting into the serious ones now.
Yeah. So how would you describe a no seller?
So I would say a no seller is a player that kind of when you as the DM you are setting up a scene or setting up an NPC or introducing someone, and the no seller just ignores all of it. You're setting up this intimidating NPC that got a scar on his eye and covered in tattoos and is 8 foot tall, nothing but muscle, and they're like, "Well, I'm going to put my sock on his head." You you are a wizard. What are you doing? Stop. When you're trying to line something up, and that can be very hard. It can break immersion for the other players when you're setting up the scene and you're trying to get everyone there, mentally get them to all see at least a similar picture, and then someone comes in and draws a curly mustache on your bad guy.
Yeah, these are the types of like this is one of the reasons why I consider these types of players to be one of the most egregious. Not necessarily in the mindset of the player. The mindset of the player might come from a place of innocence. It might come from a place of they just want to have fun, and that's okay. But when we're talking about the impact it has, these types of players have on the game. These are the types of players that really, I guess, in my personal experience, these are the players that really degrade my want to run the game. If I have a no seller in my group and I am setting up, putting a lot of effort into story and NPCs and my game design, dungeon design, plot hooks, and I have a player that is disregarding it. They're no selling. They are not necessarily like derailing the campaign because that's more griefer territory, like intentionally derailing the campaign, but it's what my character would do kind of behavior.
Well, and it's it can, like you said, once again, it may not be intentional, but it can be very disrespectful especially to the DM who has put all this time, who has put all this thought into how this character would act and portray himself and carry himself, or how this faction is laid out. But it can also be very disrespectful and make it very difficult for newer players who may not be as comfortable role playing, or may not be as comfortable as veteran players in deciding what they're doing, and it can set a bad example for newer players.
Yeah, and like just speaking as a dungeon master, like speaking from as a dungeon master to another dungeon master, um, these are dangerous players to have. Not dangerous in the fact that they're going to like intentionally ruin your game. Again, that's more egregious. That's kind of griefer territory. But I'm talking about like these are the types of players that are going to sap your will to want to run games. And so nipping this in the bud as soon as possible is something you need to do. You need to address these type of players immediately. Like don't let this type of behavior last very long because it's going to wear on you as a dungeon master. You're going to want to put cool things into your game, and then when it hits the table and you have this type of player, you can have more than one of them, kind of disregard the effort and the time that you put into this game, you're not going to want to do that anymore. You're not going to be excited to sit down at the table anymore. So you want to prevent that. And that is going to, these are the type of players I feel like make or break dungeon masters. Like truly make or break dungeon masters. Because if they're just mean, they're griefers, they just want to cause you grief, um, you can kick them out of your group and feel good about it. But these players, they're a little bit harder to to discern from other types of players. But
Well, and as you said, this is a type of player that's not necessarily trying to mess up the game. They're not necessarily, their aim isn't to, stop the game in its tracks or like mess up the session. They may be just doing it to get a little bit, they don't feel like they have the spotlight, or they may feel that it's just a cute or fun thing to do. It's not specifically malicious.
and this
It
is probably the most important case to be made to communicate with your players. This is the type of player that you immediately, if you even sniff this out and you have an inkling that your player might be like this and continue to be like this in the future, you need to communicate immediately. You need to discern if this is like a malicious thing, if they are doing it intentionally, because if you bring this to attention and they self correct, they could have been like, oh, hey man, sorry, I didn't mean to do this. I'm sorry. I will correct from here on out. Like, then there you go. You solved your problem from that on, from that point on.
absolutely. If
Yeah,
they may not be aware that it is causing that much problems. They not may not be aware of how much effort you are putting into the game, especially if they're newer players. They may just they may not understand they're doing something wrong, so they can't. It's going to be very difficult for them to correct that on their own. That's one of the reasons, as you said, communicating with this player, and as soon as this happens, you nip it in the bud. That way, you don't get you don't have your big bad evil guy talking to the players and going through this beautiful monologue that you spend hours, curating, and fireball. I'm going to try and banish the big bad evil guy. Like that's it can, like, as you said, really take the wind out of your sails.
especially if like in the middle of the in the middle of the dialogue, I cast banishment. Like, no, come on, man. I've been anticipating this for months. Let me have my dialogue as a dungeon master.
Yeah.
I live for these moments. Don't just take that away from me. Like, I understand players want to do what they want to do, but you can't forget that the dungeon master is a player too. I'm a player that's rooting for all of you. I hate it that I have to put all these challenges in your way, but let me have my cake and eat it too, Like, let me have dialogue as a big bad evil guy. Let me be
Yeah.
intimidating, feel intimidating to the player group or to the adventuring party. Like, let the dungeon master be a player.
And
Um
depending on how long the campaign's been going on, I mean, my last campaign that I finished back in the fall, that campaign went on for 2 years. I was waiting for 2 years to drop the big bad evil guy and actually in front of the party. And luckily, no one no sailed me, but I would have been heartbroken after 2 years of like, okay, this guy finally gets his time to shine. I finally get to role play this guy, and then in the middle of my speech, he gets polymorphed into an ant or something. That
yeah.
would I would have cried.
Yeah, and like that's kind of like the bigger theme I'm getting at is like dungeon masters put a lot of time and effort into these things. And if you like the dungeon master goes through the effort of like throwing a dragon in front of you and you're like, "Well, I'm a bard. I roll to seduce." That's doing what your character would do and all that kind of stuff, but you're also no selling. You are like
uh,
you're pulling everyone out of the game whenever you do stuff like that. Whenever you Like there's a dialogue or like a monologue, like big bad evil guy after 2 years. Everyone has been anticipating this. Everyone at the table has been anticipating what is happening right now. And then you just butt in. I don't care. Don't want to listen. I'm going to interrupt and like completely ruin the entire situation and it pulls everyone out of the experience immediately.
Well, one of the big guys I had in the kind of big climactic fight in my last campaign, one of my players was taking over, was challenging his brother for the clan that their father had. And like as the DM, what do you do? Like if I have this guy, like I'm playing the brother, and the player that has the other guy, like we're going back and forth, and then the no sailor, magic missiles me in the face. Like as a DM, like what do you do? Do you like you start fighting? Do you can try to continue that role play? Do you try to continue that back and forth, or like it just breaks down that whole scene that you and that player had going?
In that certain instance, I think that I would step in and just say, no, that does not happen. You're interrupting something and you're interrupting two different people. So, no, that does not happen. We're going to stop. We're going to let them have their thing. And then we're going to continue afterward. Then we can approach it from there. But like, I will just step in, hard stop, and say no.
Yeah,
But
and
I
that's
found my
something you have to
voice.
do.
I found my voice as a dungeon master, and each person has to do it for themselves. So,
Absolutely, and that's a big thing. You have to be able to tell your players no. Like this is this is something that is detrimental to the session. This is detrimental to the other people playing and their fun. No, you have to be able to tell them, like if the whole party has decided that they're going to travel west, and then you have that one player that's like, actually, I'm going to go east because that's what my player wants to go. Fine, go ahead, make a new character. Your old character is heading east.
yeah. Yeah, I mean
That's
I've had situations like that too where one player will go want to go off on their own and do their own thing, and I'll just say, "All right, cool. Make up a new character. We're not following their story anymore. If they're gonna go off and do their own thing, they're going off and doing their own thing. They're not falling under the spotlight." And it's gotten to a point now where I have a rule that like if you want to split the party, you have to split it with at least two people. So there has to be two party members at all times. So like if you want to go off and go do a secret thing, that's cool. You can go off and do your secret thing, but you have to bring someone along with you. And then
what
this actually forces players to have inter-party loyalties, and seeing these loyalties play out is actually something interesting because you'll have like inter-party conflict, but two people are the sneaky rogue types, and they stay thick as thieves literally, and then you got like the paladin and cleric against those two, so it's interesting stuff. But yeah, I've made that rule specifically because I don't like players going off and doing their own thing and stealing the spotlight, but that's kind of a different situation.
Well, and another thing that no sailor can kind of do is, and this is on the more egregious end of it, but if especially if at the end of a story arc or the beginning of the campaign, when you as the DM have something that is obviously a plot hook, and you have that one player that's like, "Oh no, I'm actually casting fireball on the bartender," or "I'm actually just going to leave the tavern and go start a fight with a bunch of random pedestrians on the street." You We're talking to the king, and I'm going to shoot an arrow at the king now because I feel like my character would want to shoot an arrow at the king. You're That's where you're really starting to push from a no seller.
Yeah,
You're going a little beyond.
yeah, you're approaching griefer territory. So I guess like close up what we like,
Yes.
address the no seller type player, and then we'll go right into griefing since we're kind of skirting around that a little bit. So,
Okay.
how would you address a no seller player?
So talking to the no seller, I as the DM have put a lot of time into this story. I have put a lot of time into these NPCs. And a lot of the other players at the table has put a lot of time into their backstory and a lot of time playing the various sessions and getting into the character and getting into that role, and you doing things just because you think it is funny or cute is breaking everyone else's immersion and you are ruining sessions. And if this doesn't stop, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And I think that's as concise as I could put it.
Yeah, I don't even know if I have anything to add to that. Like, if your dungeon master has approached you and has said like, "Hey, look, man, you're kind of ruining what I have planned, and you're kind of getting in the way of the game. It makes me feel bad." Like, if your dungeon master has already communicated to you, and you still continue to do this, I feel like you have surpassed no selling and right into griefer territory, because now you're aware and you're still intentionally doing it. Um, then that's just you being mean to your dungeon master, to the other players at the table. Um,
And
and
that's a distinction between a no seller and a griefer. As we said, a no seller, it may not be malicious, it may not be intentional, but a griefer is aware of what they are doing. They are setting out a goal to try and get the DM to just throw their hands in the air or walk away from the table to derail the campaign. They're doing it with the intent to mess things up.
yeah, and since we're already kind of talking about it, these are also the type of players that go out of their way. Griefers are the players that kind of go out of their way to do like player versus player actions, like stealing party members' characters' personal items just for the sake of doing it, because it's what your character would do. Derailing campaigns, like you said, like if there's a MacGuffin that the party has to get, this is the person that will steal it and go hide it, or steal it and sell it, or destroy it, or this is the type of player that, like you were saying earlier, goes into a throne room, like you're addressing the king, and in the middle of him talking, pulls out a crossbow and shoots him in the face. Like, they're doing it because it's like they're being malicious. Like, these are people who are intentionally trying to cause their players grief, intentionally trying to cause the dungeon master grief. These are just mean players that play this game to win, to lord something over
They're,
someone
they're
else.
doing it to get that reaction.
Yeah,
That's what they're looking for. They want you to get aggravated. They want the other players to roll their eyes or walk away from the table. They want someone, they're griefers because they want to see that grief. They want to see that aggravation. And uh, one of the ways you can't engage with that. You cannot give them that attention.
yeah.
Just you can't feed them that.
I mean, ultimately, what you need to do is remove them from your group, remove them from your table, kick them out. Don't even address them. If you've addressed any of these other behaviors, and then you've communicated, opened up that dialogue as a dungeon master, and they've continued to intentionally do any of these behaviors, rules lawyering, power gaming. Like, power gaming, that could go either way. Like, I could make an argument either way for that one. But like,
Yeah.
if you are metagaming and cheating, you're a rules lawyer, you're no selling, and you've already been addressed, you're a griefer. If you've already opened that line of dialogue and this player is still doing it, they just need to be removed from your table. They're not for you. It's hard to do, but you gotta do it. You're the griefers are the type of player that a group will fall apart, and then
Yeah.
Like everyone will kind of have a sour taste in their mouth, and then you'll come back and be like, all right, I want to start another game, I want to start another campaign, and you'll start putting those feelers out there, and then people will be like, hey, is that one player gonna play? Because if they are, I don't want to. That's the type of player we're talking about. You don't want them in your group. They're going to sour it no matter what.
Yeah. At best, they're going to ruin a session. At worst, they will break up the entire table. They will, and as you were saying, it's probably best to cut them out or boot them, but don't give them that satisfaction, which can be very difficult because a lot of griefers, if you don't give them that attention, they'll move on to something bigger. They're going to. It's kind of goes back to an arms race where, okay, well, you handle this thing, but now I'm going to do this. Well, now instead of just instead of disrespecting the king, I'm going to start trying to blow people up, and I'm going to burn down villages just to watch you try and remain calm. And that's hard to do, especially as a newer DM. That's, as you've said many times, that's why you need to find your voice. You need to be able to tell them, no, this isn't okay. I need you to leave.
Yeah. And this is by no means a hard type of individual to identify. You'll
Yeah,
know almost immediately with how they react to certain situations. So, like, don't feel bad. Like, if you
yeah,
have an idea that this person might be a griefer, you're already on the wrong track. Like, you're already like you need to solve that situation any way you can find to solve it, because if you are already like, I don't know, I'm doing these things and I've kind of talked to them and they're still doing it, I don't want to kick them out, kick them out.
yeah.
That's
As you said, they're not difficult to identify. They're going to be the players that in session zero or in the first session, they are going to be very quick to start causing problems. They're going to be very quick to start annoying and aggravating, if not you, the other players at the table.
yeah,
They're going to make themselves known.
yeah. So, opening up lines of dialogue and communicating with your players beforehand from the very beginning, session zero, putting out all of your homebrew rules. You may not have them all at once, at
Yeah.
session zero or whatever, but like communicating things as they come up, being able to readdress situations if they don't sit right with you, having an open, clear line of dialogue with your players is the best thing you can do to, one, mitigate a lot of these issues, and two, identify these problems as soon as they arise, and hopefully solve these issues. So if you've been doing this, you practice this behavior, and you still have a player that is doing this, they are a griefer. There is no excuse for it, and they are doing it intentionally. They are aware of it, and they continue to do it. They may be your friend, and that sucks, but they are not for your table, and that's okay.
Yeah.
There's this saying, like, that's not gatekeeping, because there's, a saying that, like, everyone is welcome to my table, but that doesn't mean you're welcome to stay at my table. Like, I'll invite you to my
Absolutely.
table. I'll invite anyone to my table, but that does not mean they get to stay there permanently.
Yeah.
If you are acting like this, I don't want to deal with you. I'm a dungeon master that's got to do a lot of other things. Babysitting a player is not on my list of things to do.
Yeah, and there's as a lot of the other categories of problem players, you can talk to them. You can try and work something out, especially with like power gamers or rules lawyers. They may not they may not get it perfect. They may still have some of those habits, but a griefer, when you're talking to a griefer, they are doing this intentionally. Letting them know they're doing it isn't going to help any. Talking to them is not going to help because they are aware of it and they are doing it on purpose. That is not what friends do to each other.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, that's like you are welcome at my table. You can come to my table, and it may not be the right fit. You may not like the kind of game I run. You may want more rules as written instead of homebrew, and that's fine. But just because you come to the table does not mean I have to tolerate you, for lack of a better word, being a butthead. Make it a little bit more clean. But that's if if you're not going to respect me and the rest of the players, especially if you are intentionally disrespecting me and the rest of the players as a griefer would do, you do not get to stay at my table.
Yeah, and that like I guess perfectly wraps it up. I mean, that's all we had.
Yeah, there we go.
You got any closing remarks? Like anything you like last minute thing you want to say to like a new GM? Like what's just it doesn't have to be pertaining to any of this stuff. Uh
Okay.
what is just a word of advice that you would give to a new fresh dungeon master?
Communication is key. Talk to your players, let them know you may not know what type of game you want. You may not know what type of DM you are yet, but get feedback from your players. Have that communication open. So if something does come up, or if there is a someone does have a problem, they feel they can come and talk to you and try and reconcile any differences that may be there.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. Just to piggyback off of you a little bit, and then I'll give my word of advice. But kind of what you're saying, uh, like creating a space for your players to come to you and talk things out and discuss ideas with you is perfect thing. Like that's exactly what you want. You don't want them conspiring against you. You want them conspiring with you. And so creating a space where they'll come to you with their weird wacky plans to take down the big bad evil guy. That's cool. That's the because I guarantee you a lot of times you'll have ideas and then the players will come to you with ideas and you're like that's cooler, I want to do that instead. But if you create a space where it's hostile and the players don't feel like they can come to you and talk about their ideas because you're going to shut them down, they're not going to do that and your game's going to feel stale to them and to you because the best aspect of this game is the commingling of ideas.
That collaboration.
Yeah, yeah, precisely.
And that's just one thing I'd like to say on that. Having your, especially this may be more targeted towards the players, if you do have that crazy idea, bring it up to your DM, because if you are conspiring against your DM and you spring that on them in the middle of a session, they're going to be more likely to just like instinctively they'll feel like they don't have time to think about it, and they'll just shut it down. Whereas if you kind of talk to them and like, hey, this is what I'm planning, this is what I think makes sense, this would be really cool, whatever it is, they'll probably agree with you and make it so that you get to do that cool thing. You get to do that wacky thing you want to do, but it still fits within inside the campaign and the narrative that they're trying to build.
I feel like that's a behavior that is very common between game masters that like forever DMs that get a chance to play. They are more like that is a habit that is practiced by those types of players. It's a forever DM that gets to play a little bit that I feel like should be practiced by all players. It
Yeah,
shouldn't, because I've had players that are fairly new and stuff like that, and they don't do things like that. They don't bring their ideas to me. The most they'll do is they'll give me a pretty honestly generic backstory that I've seen and read 100
yeah.
times, but that's fine. They're just getting into the hobby. But it's the forever DMs that have all these weird, wacky ideas, and they're like, I want to make sure that this can happen, so I'm going to ask
Well,
if I could do it. And
and a
but
lot of the DMs and your veteran players, they're probably more apt to do that because they've had those crazy, wacky ideas that they fell in love with, and then we're like, "Hey, I'm going to do this," and had their heart broken when they get shut down.
yeah,
They're trying to avoid that, and that's the best way to avoid it.
Yeah. So I guess closing remarks for me, one thing that I would say to a new dungeon master is mold whatever game system you're playing, mold it to your liking. Experiment. Like try new things out. Like this is going to be you may find things in the game that you just don't like or want changed or just want to try something new because you've been playing the same system for 15 years. That's not you if you're a new dungeon master, but trust me, it will get that way.
Get weird with it.
Yeah, try new things. I mean, you're going to discover things about the game. Like you're gonna understand the game more when you try to experiment because you're gonna understand the game design and like the aspects of the game that work behind the scenes. You're talking about like encounter balance and stuff like that. But don't be afraid to experiment, especially if this is like your first session, your first campaign. Bring all those fresh new ideas to the table. Try them out. This is your perfect time to do it because you don't have that expectation of, I've been running games for, however many years. If I mess up, it hurts a little bit more when I mess up because I know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? So get those out of the
Yeah,
way early. Experiment. This is where you're going to find your voice as a dungeon master. Find your niche in your style as a dungeon master. And don't be afraid to do it. That's what makes this hobby fresh and new. If you're trying to just be Matt Mercer, if you're just trying to be, Brandon Lee Mulligan or Matthew Colville or any of these other big, great people, they're already there. They're already doing what
yeah,
you want to emulate. It's already being done. Do what you want. Do what you bring your ideas to the table instead. I think this hobby is
yeah,
the best when there's more ideas commingling, the more collaboration between individuals, other game masters. I collaborate with other game masters, one here that I have on the show.
yeah,
So, like, don't be afraid to try new things and put them out there too. If you find something that works,
yeah.
share it with the community, please. We need all the help we can get.
Right. And your idea may not work for me, but it may get me thinking in a way that I normally wouldn't have. And that's, as you said, that's one of the beautiful things about this hobby and this community is it doesn't have to be the same at every table. It's better if it isn't. There is a table for everyone, and you may be the DM that someone has been looking for. Not to get too romantic with it.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of wayward players out there that,
Yeah,
have tried a few groups and that, they may not like the way that people try to copy, you know, Matthew Mercer or whatever. They might be tired of that. And they're just like, every time I play, it's trying to make like this big old thing. And I just want to relax and I just want to roll some dice and kill some monsters.
yeah,
That's fine. That's not how I like to play. I like, narrative, like character driven stuff, but that's not for me. That's not the type of game I like to run.
yeah.
But there are players that like to play in those types of games. So if you like running those, beer and pretzels kind of games, that's what they're called, or like mega dungeons, or any of these different
Those
types of
meat
ideas.
grinders.
I love meat grinders. Meat grinder dungeons are the best. But like if you like these kinds of games and you want to run them, do it. Don't be afraid. Try your new ideas out. Don't be pressured to be like the greats, quote unquote. Be yourself.
Well, don't be afraid to take from them. Like you can take ideas from them, but
Absolutely.
don't be afraid to shift it and make it something that you're more comfortable with. Don't be afraid to make their rules or make their ideas your own.
Yeah.
The
So,
best DMs steal from the most obscure sources.
yeah, Matthew Colville said the measure of a great DM is the obscurity at which they make their references, like you said. But yeah, That's
I'm
a
probably paraphrasing him.
yeah, I probably am too. But yeah, that's a Matthew Colville quote. That's a great one.
Oh,
But yeah, that's all I have. You got any? We already kind of went through closing remarks, so just want to call it.
yeah,
And all right,
I think we've covered everything.
why don't you go ahead and shut yourself out real quick, and then we'll get out of here.
Once again, I am Thistle Sifter on TikTok and Thistle_Sifter on Instagram. And yeah, I cover D&D. I've played for almost 17 years now.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, let's get out of here.
All right.
Deuces.
Bye.